Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of how to build your own X-Wing. Had an idea that would make things a little simpler and a little harder and a little simpler. I decided to color code all 4 wings, 4 different colors. That's a little magenta dot. And then I was able to color code the brackets. So there's a little magenta dot here and here on this side to indicate that these 2 fellas on this side made up with this. And there's also some green, some blue, and some black. So I was able to take all 4 of these brackets off and know that I can put them back on correctly. So pretty simple stuff. Didn't occur to me before. The reason I did that is because I literally got out of the shower yesterday morning and thought, I'm just going to use a Dremel. I'm just going to route into the aluminum. I'm going to hide those wires, and then I'll just putty over them. You could probably also put like a 020 styrene over top. I'm going to see if the putty works first. If not, then I can do styrene. I took a photograph of my very, very shitty Dremel work. It chattered quite a bit. I've got one of those big turbo Dremels, and I used this little bit. I'm going to probably just buy a mill, like a little mini, like Proxxon or Shoreline or whatever mill. Actually, if someone knows a good small mill that would, let's see here, let's figure this out live on camera. I need to route a trench that's about 5 millimeters deep and 5 millimeters wide and 1.5 millimeters deep. 1.3 I could probably get away with into these little metal channels. I did it by hand. It looks horrific. Every time it chattered, that just means more putty. So everything right now is puttied over, and I've got the wires hanging out. They will be inside the hull, and you really won't be able to see them unless you're looking for them. And then the other side, as I will show you shortly, gets routed up through here into the engine can void, and then out the back into the engines. And all this stuff is hidden by a planton from the Phantom model. Another Phantom engine half, essentially. So now my next step will be to sand these 4 brackets smooth, and then I'll prime it, and I'll see where we are and make a determination whether I want to add a little more styrene. If I do, then I'm probably going to go back to the hull and take out a little more. Somebody asked me in the comments section how I did that. It was very simple. I put the piece of tape down. I took a sharp, fresh number 11 blade per side and just cut very gingerly and then scraped smooth. Pretty basic. I also at some point took some like 80 grit sandpaper, put it on a 1-2-3 block as a sanding block essentially, and sort of went to town a little bit. Whatever gets the job done. It's so funny. I made a big point about beveling it. It's beveled in the completely opposite direction of the bracket. So yeah, I like took the time to bevel this shit. Really, it should have been beveled this way if I was going to bevel it at all, because that's the direction of the flat piece of aluminum. So all I did, I guess, was hide the thickness of the body by doing that bevel sloping inwards. So it's not necessary at all. So that was kind of fun to realize that I completely didn't need to do that. So gonna do some sanding. Very, very fun, very exciting. I'll show you what happens after the break. All right, I have sanded and I have primed. Looks like I'll do like a quick little skim coat with a little Tamiya putty in a couple little places, and that's just out of the tube, smear it down, let it dry. I usually let things dry overnight and then hit it with like a 400 grit sandpaper and it'll be like glass smooth. But as you can see, pretty much there. And again, the only thing you're going to be seeing, and this is with the wings closed even, will be most of this top part and just a sliver of this plate. A lot of this is kind of obscured by the hull. It's going to be like that essentially. And when it's open, everything's invisible. But, and this is still a little tacky, but if I'm looking at it, you know, it has made it up against this hard edge successfully and cleanly. All right, so for this build, we are going to be replicating Red 5. Red 5 was a Hero X-Wing, which means that it was constructed with many unique little plant-on details. By plant-on details, I mean anything that was literally planted onto something else. So I'm going to start with the upper right wing, the starboard wing. And this is not every single piece you need for a wing. There will be a couple plantons that go on the trailing edge and something on the leading edge. I'll leave that off until just major construction is finished. So I'm going to need a wing. I'm going to need what I call the engine cans. And again, this is all V5 lineage parts. So if you were lucky enough to get a V5 X-Wing, all this pretty much translates. When I did the pattern work for the V5, I went ahead and labeled these, what I call the cans. These are parts of a Saturn V. When you look at higher res photography of all these X-Wings, you're like, oh God, why? These cans flip around a lot. So I did a little handy-dandy cheat sheet on the inside in a little piece of etched acrylic. So this says Red 5, upper right, lower left, lower right. Red 5, upper right. So this is the right can for upper right wing. This will nest onto here. And then the engine will go out of the back of the part. Lower engine. This is off of, it's the housing, off of a C-Lab. And then we start getting into the weirdness of the heroes. The C-Lab part, it's either going to be this part or the other part. So this is interesting. I'm going to have to look at photographs and get back to you on that in a second. There are two plant-on parts, and these guys sit, either that one or this one, trimmed, sit inside this little well. That is completely dependent on photography to figure out which was which. What they would do is they would put one in the upper left or right and then swap it for the lower. So it's either like this or it's like this. Then there is this little guy, another piece off the C-Lab, and this plants right there. And depending on the bird, it's either going to be like that, or the mirror image version of this. And then there are the little guys that sit from, I think it's either the Stug or the Hummel, next to that engine housing, the intake housing. There is a very little plant-on piece on Red 5 for the upper right wing from the C-Lab from one of the engines itself, the engine bells. I'll add that on after the fact. And then there are these little guys. There's going to be one that goes on the underside of the wing and one that goes on the top. And then there is the engine itself. Now, my engine is unique to this. I've grown it. This was a file that Josh up-detailed for the 1/12 X-Wing, but it actually grows pretty well for 124. I have mine in 3 pieces because there's a NeoPixel array. It's a bunch of LEDs and a disc that will go into there, and then the wires come through there. And I just made it like this because my hands are kind of crappy. A little extra work to glue it, but a lot easier to fish the wires through. So that goes there, and then, as usual, the burner can. This burner can is much more detailed, and it has the heat sink already as part of the assembly, and that all friction fits. And then I added, well, and then there's the engine bells that go inside the intakes. For a little extra pizzazz, I added little fins that will surround those engine bells. And I have a very fancy laser cannon plant-on that is unique to this, that has artificially taller stalks, and that sits on the very end of the wing. This will mate up nicely with my laser cannon bodies, which are completely hollow, and have those 3 corresponding tabs. This is so, honestly, I can transport it. Those engine, or those laser cannons should be able to sort of key in, and actually there is a piece of 3/16, I want to say, yeah, brass that sits nicely in here. That will also travel up into the body, probably. Oh, and I should also mention this is, I wrote it down on the thing somewhere, 7/16 brass that goes nicely into that groan part on the engine, and that is what sits inside the engine can housing. So that will all be friction fit, and oh, and last but not least for this little selection, 90043 1/8 inch or 3.2 millimeter ABS channel from Plastruct. That's a little detail part, little ribbing that goes on inside there. So, oh, and one more piece. The Phantom engine half, like I had mentioned before, which will hide a multitude of things in there. It is essentially one of these cut down. It'd be good if I actually showed the damn thing. It's one of these cut down, so it's an engine, but it's a half. It's a model kit part. All right, so let's get started. Okay, I have found a nice way to start is with the front engine intakes. Only in that it helps me locate positioning a little bit. So I take this, engine can base, if whatever you want to call it, a 1, 2, 3 block, 3, 2, 1 block, 3, 2, 1, go! 1, 2, 3 block to ensure a 90-degree angle, and the C-Lab lower intake. These little ribs face forward, which is that direction. That will lay right here. It's going to line up nicely with these. There's a little tab in here and here, the inside edges of those tabs. This is resin. Resin flexes a little bit. It will deform ever so slightly. So the first thing I'm going to do is one side and sort of lock that down and ensure that 90 degrees. And then I'll do the other side to match. And there you go. Engine intake lower done. So that allows me to key it up against the wing. Boop, sits right there. Look at that. And I can also test the intake. Yep, that sits flush the way it's supposed to. How beautiful. So that's that's very easy. So now we have to locate where this sits on the wing. This sits pretty much right up against the edge of the wing, like that. Against that Holgate and Reynolds brick. It's going to overshoot the wing onto here, onto the bracket, just a smidge. Once I like where this is sitting, and I think I do, I will then glue it down. And we are glued. So that's the can, lower upper, or can base. The can will sit so that, and this is the front facing, will sit like that. And again, resin flexes a little bit. You have to pinch it until this lines up with that outer edge, and that lines up with that outer edge, and the inner edges of that Saturn part somehow magically line up with the C-Lab, and the whole thing's flush on the front. And that gives you your intake. Very exciting. Before I put this little guy in, I'm going to add that little anachronistic detail that does not exist on any of the models into a little well in there. That just, to me, makes it look kind of cool. So that's fun. Okay. Alright, so that is the bottom intake sorted. Now we add the Saturn Bell. I have pre-made a slot for this little bit of cardstock that sits up as an upright. Made my life a little easier. None of the kits have ever had that. So that's again a little extra zing that I've added to these things. And as you can see, that sits nicely right there, and there's a little bit of zhuzh that they normally don't have. Now that we've got this on here, we need to get these wires out the back of this guy. So just a little bit of drill action. Now we take note of the Phantom engine. All right, so that sits like that in Red 5. There you can see the little bit of bolt action still. I'm going to score a little bit of the engine away so that it sits flush. I forgot to mention there is also a C-Lab tank that I grew as a whole on a lot of these models. It was just they put a half there, and that's to hide wiring. And then there's also a little cage, and this cage will also be a planton right there. It's this little bit. And looking at photographs, it's impossible to determine whether this piece was used or this piece was used and trimmed down. So I'm going to roll the dice and trim down this piece and use this piece. Why not? It's a 50-50 shot. And until somebody goes into the archives and opens up the Red 5 X-Wing wings real wide, we're not going to know. I gave myself as much room as I could, knowing that any slack can just hide here in the void. So I will now mark where I want to score the Phantom. Hog out a little bit for these bolts, and that'll enable it, and the wires, now that I think about it, and that'll enable it to sit flush. So I'll do that real quick. That's a lot more than I anticipated, but again, kind of hidden once you put that engine, that C-Lab tank on. All right, there we go. So that enables that whole assembly to sit flush. So I can now glue that down, and this front goes kind of flush. I think I'm gonna, how do I like to mount it? I think I like to mount it like that. Yeesh. Why not? Yeah. Okay. This is glued. We're done. All right, next is, like I said, one of these two guys. You have to roll the dice. Let's go with this one. So that goes right up to here. And as you can see, I have to trim it. So make a little trim line and do a little cutting. There we go. So that goes in there. I believe it is centered. The way we figured out that this was used was pretty amazing. There are photos of one of the Hero X-Wings from this angle, and this entire thing, I mean, there's, you know, the metal, but this entire thing is machined acrylic, and it hadn't been primed yet, and we could see through. They hadn't even put the Holgate and Reynolds brick stuff down. You could see through this acrylic machined box and see the telltale orange C-Lab. It's pretty exciting stuff. All 10 of us in the world were very, very excited indeed. All right, so I'm going to glue this down. Little cage bit goes on here, right? And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, I actually have to trim a tine or two for the sake of being pretty. Not entirely remembering, but let's put it sort of into place and see. Yeah, two of these guys sit here, so I have to cut them down so that they're flush. Cage glued, cage good. Does that might conclude everything that goes into this dumb thing? All right, so there's some stuff that I will glue there, but I believe that's it for the well for a Hero X-Wing. And as you can see, once you put a piece of acrylic down, you get, ooh, oh, look at that depth. Very nice. And that's what I love about the Hero X-Wings. It's just there's so much extra little stuff going on that, again, once the wings are on and open, you never can see that direction. But maybe you can from the front a little bit, but even the hull is going to cover that up to a degree. So it's just really, really amazing stuff to me. Okay, now we're going to detail the last bit of the inner wing. It's this guy and some of that Plastrux C channel. And the best thing to do, this sits approximately right about there, a little bit in, a little bit not squared. You kind of want to eyeball it and put down the laser cut piece and see where it sits. That's about right, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah, everything's a little organic, and again, each one was different, and again, it's really hard to tell, like when you're talking millimeters, where something's going to sit. So you just have to kind of make a best guess a lot of the time with this kind of stuff, and you know, make peace with the fact that if you didn't do it 100% crazy ass correctly, that it's not going to keep you up at night. All right, now these also sit at super duper weird angles. This kind of follows this angle, so you got to make a little bit of a cut there, and no one's going to see down in there, so that this doesn't have to be mitered or super duper pretty. All right, so I think that's right. I'm going to go to picture. I'm pretty sure that's right. That, my friends, is an inner wing. In this case, red 5 upper right. So then I guess next I'm going to address the laser cannon mount. And drilling some holes for some magnets so that when the wings are closed, they snap. It's very satisfying. All right, so that'll be the next video.